We're too quick to slap labels on kids, prescribe pills without actually addressing what might be going on underneath.
Right.
He wants us to shift from just managing symptoms to really getting to the heart of their pain.
Yeah. So we're starting to see how deeply trauma can affect us, especially early in life. But then the question is how do we actually heal from it? Ever slam on your brakes because someone cut you off in traffic?
Mm-hmm.
You know that feeling, heart in your throat? That kind of sticks around even after you're safe.
Oh, yeah.
It's your body remembers even when your mind's moved on, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're diving deep into today. How trauma kind of gets embedded in us.
Mm-hmm.
And the surprising ways we can heal. All that and more with The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk.
Exactly.
And what's fascinating is that, Dr. van der Kolk, he's not just theorizing about this stuff.
Right.
He's a psychiatrist who's spent decades actually working with trauma survivors, veterans, victims of abuse, you name it. And he combines those real life experiences, those stories, with what we're learning about neuroscience to give us this new understanding of what happens in our brains, in our bodies when we experience something traumatic.
Right. It's the book kind of explodes that myth that trauma is all in your head, right? Very cool to say, no, it actually rewires our brains, especially how we react to threats or things that even seem threatening, even if they're not really. Have you ever totally overreacted to something really small?
Oh, all the time.
Like a dropped coffee mug sending you into a total tailspin?
It happens. Yeah. It's not just you. Think about your amygdala, right?
Okay.
That little, it's like an almond-shaped part of your brain.
Yep.
Like a smoke detector.
No.
Always on, always scanning for danger.
Right.
And when it senses a threat, bam, fight or flight kicks in.
Right.
But sometimes the smoke is just, burnt toast, right?
Right.
That's where the watchtower of your brain comes in, your medial prefrontal cortex. This usually assesses, is this danger for real?
But trauma messes with that process.
Yeah.
The watchtower's offline and suddenly burnt toast is a full-on house fire.
Exactly. Trauma can really throw off your brain's ability to just chill out.
Wow.
Even when there's no real danger present, logic and reason just go out the window. Because those deeper brain regions, they're stuck in survival mode.
Which is where The Body Keeps the Score comes in.
Yeah.
It's not just our minds, right?
Yeah.
This book is highlighting how trauma gets lodged in our bodies. Our bodies remember when our minds are trying to forget.
Yeah, and there's actual science behind this. Think about your autonomic nervous system.
Okay.
It's like the gas pedal and the brake of your body, right? The sympathetic nervous system that revs you up for action when you're stressed.
Right.
And the parasympathetic system helps you calm down, recover.
Right.
Trauma, especially if it's ongoing, it can make those two get out of sync.
So it's your body gets stuck with its foot on the gas, even when there's no one chasing it.
You got it. And there's a way to actually measure this, too. It's called heart rate variability, or HRV.
Yeah.
Think of it like your heart's ability to dance between those gas and brake pedals.
Okay.
Good at HRV means you can handle stress, you can bounce back. Trauma throws off that rhythm. Suddenly you're stuck, either constantly on edge or feeling totally numbed out.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That explains why someone who's been through something traumatic might flinch at a touch or have these really intense emotional reactions.
Right.
It's their body's still on high alert.
Exactly.
Even if logically the situation doesn't call for it.
And the vagus nerve is a big part of this too. It's like this super highway connecting your brain and body.
Right.
And it's essential for us to be social creatures, to connect.
Right.
Trauma can damage that highway.
Wow.
Making it hard to feel safe, connected to other people.
So it's your body is saying danger even when your mind wants to say hello.
Exactly.
It's a lot to take in, and it gets even more complicated when you think about childhood trauma. Van der Kolk talks about this study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACE study.
Yeah.
Wow, it's eye-opening.
Groundbreaking study, the ACE study, they asked adults about their experiences with things like abuse, neglect, just dysfunction in their childhood homes.
Right.
The results were kind of shocking, honestly. Over 2/3 had experienced at least one adverse childhood experience.
Wow.
And 1 in 8 had gone through 4 or more.
And the study connected those early experiences to some really serious issues later in life.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Chronic illnesses, mental health challenges, even things like heart disease, cancer, all linked back to those early traumas.
It's like laying the groundwork.
It is. And what's even more alarming, the risk goes up with each additional trauma. It's like each one builds on the last.
Which makes the book's critique on over-medicating kids who are struggling hit even harder.
Yeah.
It feels like we're putting a Band-Aid on a much deeper wound.
Van der Kolk is worried we're too quick to, slap labels on kids, prescribe pills without actually addressing what might be going on underneath.
Right.
He wants us to shift from just managing symptoms to, really getting to the heart of their pain.
Yeah. So we're starting to see, how deeply trauma can affect us, especially early in life. But then the question is, how do we actually heal from that?
Right.
We've talked about how just talking about it might not be enough.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting, I think. The book dives into all these alternative therapies, ones that work directly with your body, with your emotions. And it's not about ignoring the mental aspect of it, but acknowledging that trauma embeds itself physically, too.
Right. It's like that saying, you can't heal what you don't feel. So how do we start to actually, feel those deeper layers to get unstuck?
Well, Van der Kolk, he's a huge advocate for what he calls bottom-up approaches.
Okay.
So instead of trying to change your thoughts first, you start by working with your body, with its sensations.
Okay, so it's less about thinking your way out of it and more about feeling your way through.
Exactly. Things like yoga, for example, can be incredibly powerful for regulating your nervous system. Remember how we were talking about your body being stuck on fight or flight?
Right.
Yoga helps you kind of hit the reset button on that.
So my weekly yoga class is actually a form of trauma therapy.
In a way, it can be.
Okay, I'll take it.
That focus on breath work, mindfulness, those gentle movements, it can really help you reconnect with your body in a safe way, in a grounding way. And trauma often makes us feel so disconnected from our physical selves.
Right.
Almost afraid of our own sensations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If your body has, learned to associate touch with danger, it's going to take time. It's going to take a gentle approach to kind of rewire those responses. So yoga, mindfulness, those are things that people might already have in their lives. But you also mentioned neurofeedback, which sounds way more high-tech.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. So basically, they hook you up to these sensors.
Okay.
They measure your brainwave activity, and you actually get to see your brainwaves on a screen.
Whoa, so you're literally watching your brain work.
You are. And the really cool part is, with practice, you can actually learn to consciously influence those brainwaves. Yeah. It's like biofeedback, but for your brain.
So how does this help with trauma?
Well, remember we were talking about how trauma can throw off your brainwave patterns?
Right.
Neurofeedback helps retrain those patterns. So you're creating more balance, more flexibility.
So you're basically teaching your brain to chill out or perk up, depending on what you need in that moment.
Yeah. It's like a workout, but for your brainwaves.
Wow.
And studies are showing that it can help with things like anxiety, insomnia, flashbacks, even chronic pain. All things that can stem from trauma.
It's amazing how adaptable our brains are, even after going through something so difficult.
It's one of the most hopeful things that Van der Kolk highlights. Recovery, it isn't linear. You know, it's not about erasing the trauma, but learning to live with it and even maybe to grow from it.
Right. It's like those Japanese bowls, the kintsugi.
Yes.
Where they repair the cracks with gold. The bowl is stronger and even more beautiful for having been broken.
Exactly. You don't want to pretend the trauma didn't happen. It's about incorporating it into your story, but not letting it define you.
You mentioned earlier that connection is a huge part of healing. But for someone who's been through trauma, connecting with others, that can feel terrifying.
Absolutely, yeah. Trauma can really shatter your trust, make you feel unsafe, unworthy of love. But here's the paradox. Van der Kolk shows how connection is often the key to unlocking that deeper healing.
So it's not just about, feeling safe with other people, but feeling safe in your own skin.
That's powerful. And it brings us back to IFS, internal family systems therapy.
Right, where your inner world is like this family of different parts. The protector, the child, the critic.
And after trauma, those parts, they can get really polarized. You know, the protector's on high alert, the child is terrified, the critic is berating you for not being over it already.
So it's about like getting to know those parts, not judging them, learning to work with them instead of against them.
Exactly. IFS is all about cultivating inner connection, learning to relate to those parts of yourself with curiosity, with compassion, even love. And when you have that inner harmony, it becomes easier to connect authentically with others.
This reminds me of that story in the book about Marilyn.
Oh, yes.
Who felt like she had all these different personalities because of the abuse she experienced as a child.
Right. She had this good girl who tried to please everyone and this bad girl who acted out. It was like she was constantly at war with herself.
And through therapy, she realized those weren't different personalities, just different parts of herself trying to cope with the trauma.
And as she started listening to those parts with compassion, she could start to integrate them into a more whole sense of herself.
Creating that internal family harmony is so important because when we're fighting ourselves, it's hard to let anyone else in. And this all points to something else van der Kolk emphasizes. There's no single path to healing.
And that's incredibly hopeful, I think. It means you get to figure out what works for you. There's no right or wrong way to heal from trauma.
It takes the pressure off, having to fit into some mold, which is probably the last thing someone who's been through trauma needs. And he doesn't shy away from the tough stuff in this book.
No, he doesn't.
But he offers this sense of hope and possibility.
He does.
That I think is crucial.
He reminds you that while trauma can be this defining experience, it doesn't have to define the rest of your life.
Right.
It can make you question everything, but it can also lead to profound growth and change.
Which brings us to the heart of his message.
Yeah.
How do we build a more trauma-sensitive world?
It starts by acknowledging how widespread trauma really is. You know, it's not just something that happens to other people.
Right.
It's about creating a culture of compassion where people feel safe enough to come forward, share their stories without shame, without judgment.
And that takes a collective effort, right? It's not just on individuals to heal in isolation. It's on all of us to create systems that support that healing.
Absolutely. We need trauma-informed approaches in schools, healthcare, the justice system, everywhere. He gives that striking example of the Bonus Army to really illustrate this.
Right. And for those who don't know, the Bonus Army was this group of World War I veterans who marched on Washington.
Right.
Demanding their promised bonuses. And instead of being met with understanding, they were met with violence.
Yeah. Van der Kolk uses that as a parallel for how we often treat trauma survivors today. We tell them to just get over it, without recognizing the deep impact of their experiences.
It's like we're blaming the victims for their own wounds.
Exactly. And that just adds another layer of trauma on top of everything else.
Right.
We need to shift from a culture of blame and shame to a culture of understanding and support.
So how do we actually start making that shift? It feels like such a huge task.
It starts with education.
Okay.
We need to raise awareness about trauma, its ripple effects, and we need to train the professionals who work with people, teachers, therapists, doctors, police officers, to be trauma-informed so they're responding with empathy, not judgment.
It's about creating a world where people don't feel like they have to suffer in silence.
And there's a powerful economic argument for this, too. Economist James Heckman, he showed that investing in early childhood development, especially for kids who've been through trauma, has huge benefits for society as a whole.
So it's not just the right thing to do. It makes economic sense. Addressing trauma isn't just about individual healing, but about creating a healthier, more just world for everyone.
And Van der Kolk really emphasizes that there are already so many inspiring examples of people finding their way to healing, even after unimaginable hardship.
Right. He shares all these stories of resilience and hope, like the story of Bill, a Vietnam veteran who struggled with PTSD for years.
Right. Tried traditional therapy, which helped to a point.
Mm-hmm.
But then he discovered Feldenkrais, this very gentle form of body work.
Okay.
And later, yoga.
It wasn't just about processing the memories in his mind. It was about reconnecting with his body, finding a sense of peace and being present.
And that's what's so important.
Yeah.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Right.
It's about finding what resonates with you, what makes you feel safe, grounded, connected.
And being open to the possibility that healing can come in many forms.
Exactly. It's not about erasing the past, but learning to make peace with it and create a full and meaningful life moving forward.
You know, one of the things that really struck me about The Body Keeps the Score is how van der Kolk brings in so many different perspectives. Neuroscience, psychology, even history, spirituality.
Yeah.
It feels like he's weaving together this tapestry of understanding about like trauma and healing.
He's really good at that. He's a master at like taking these complex ideas and making them, actually relatable. Like when he talks about the reptilian brain taking over when we're terrified.
Oh, yeah.
That really landed for me.
Right. It's like our brains literally go into survival mode and we're not even aware of it. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. So the reptilian brain is like the oldest part of our brain.
Right.
Think basic instincts, fight, flight, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And when something truly terrifying happens, that primal part of us, it can override the more like rational thinking part of our brain.
Which explains why someone might like freeze up.
Right.
Or have this like completely over-the-top reaction to something that to other people seems really small, but their body is reacting to like a perceived threat.
Yeah.
Even if their mind hasn't caught up yet.
Exactly. And what's important to remember is that it's not a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's just our biology trying to keep us safe.
This also made me think about how trauma affects like not just individuals, but whole communities.
Oh, yeah.
The book talks about like historical trauma, where the effects of trauma like can be passed down for generations.
Right, like the legacy of slavery, the Holocaust.
Right.
The forced removal of indigenous children from their families.
Right. These events create these like ripples of trauma.
Yeah.
That are felt for generations. It's a powerful reminder that we don't experience trauma in isolation.
We don't.
Right? It's shaped by like our history, our culture, the systems we live in.
Absolutely.
Which leads to what I found to be one of the most hopeful concepts in the book.
Okay.
Which is post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
It seems like counterintuitive.
It does.
But van der Kolk shows how people can actually grow from these like incredibly painful experiences.
He's very clear that he's not minimizing the pain of trauma.
Right.
But he also recognizes that it can be a catalyst for really profound personal transformation.
Right.
He tells all these stories of people who've, they've found deeper meaning. They found purpose in their lives.
Wow.
Because of what they've been through.
It's like that idea that sometimes you have to like break down to break through.
Yes.
Right.
They've faced their demons.
Yeah.
Done the hard work of healing, and they come out the other side stronger, more resilient.
They have a different perspective.
Yeah.
A deeper appreciation for life.
Yeah.
Greater sense of empathy for other people who are struggling.
One of the most powerful examples he gives of this kind of like collective healing is the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid.
Right. Instead of like seeking revenge, they chose truth and forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's amazing how they created this space for victims to share their stories, to like acknowledge the harm that was done, and to like begin to rebuild their nation.
It was a long process
Right.
and a messy one, but it showed that healing is possible, even after unimaginable trauma.
And it feels like that's what van der Kolk is calling for, like on a larger scale.
Yeah.
Like a world that acknowledges the prevalence of trauma, that creates space for healing, that responds with compassion instead of judgment.
He really emphasizes the importance of creating safe spaces for people to tell their stories without shame, to connect with other people who understand, to access resources they need to heal.
It's about shifting from a culture of silence to a culture of support.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it starts with each of us, We can educate ourselves about trauma, challenge our own biases, show up with compassion, for ourselves, for other people.
Right.
We can become trauma-informed in our own families, our workplaces, our communities.
This deep dive into The Body Keeps the Score has been like an incredible journey.
It has.
It's been challenging at times, but ultimately so hopeful.
Van der Kolk's work is like a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, our capacity to heal, to grow, even when we face incredible adversity.
If you're listening to this and you're resonating with these ideas, you're not alone.
We're not.
There are resources out there, there are people who care, and there is always hope. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.